Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming back for another episode of your favorite podcast, Ranching Reboot. I'm your host, Brian Alexander. This episode of this podcast is sponsored by my amazing patrons on Patreon.com and my awesome subscribers on Spotify. Subscribers and supporters don't have to listen to ads, and if you'd like to show your support for the podcast, check out Patreon.com/RedHillsRancher or check the show notes. You can also scroll down in the show notes on Spotify and click the support link. Don't forget about the scholarship that I'm giving away to one lucky listener to attend the Noble Research Institute's excellent Essentials of Regenerative Ranching course in Ardmore, Oklahoma, October 31st to November 1st. You can navigate to redhillsrancher.com/noble and click the link, or just click the link in the show notes. Give me your email address and you'll be entered for a chance to win. It's just that easy. Last week, I was out in Lakin, Kansas for the Excellent Bottom Line Conference. It was great to see my friends and meet some new fans. The next time I'm planning on being in public will be September 6th and 7th in Torrington, Wyoming for the Wyoming Farm Ranch and Hemp Show. I hope to see some of y'all there. This episode is also sponsored by Grassroots Carbon. Grassroots Carbon is looking for more acres to sign up, and the time is running out to get on the sampling schedule for this year. If you have over 500 acres and you do some sort of rotational grazing, you're a great candidate for Grassroots Carbon. The price of carbon is only going to go up, and Grassroots wants to pay you for your good management practices. $20 an acre. How's that sound? That's just kind of the floor. Depending on soil type and area, it could be more than that, much more. And if you're listening to this, you're probably already on the right track. So go check out grassrootscarbon.com/reboot and claim your piece of the carbon gold rush. That's grassrootscarbon.com/reboot, or just click the Grassroots Carbon link in my show notes or on my Linktree. Speaking of Linktree, it's a great place to stay current with all the coupon codes and discounts that my partners provide, like 10% off Wild Ass Soap and 10% off your first order from Blue Nest Beef. Also on my Linktree are links to our private Facebook group, the Ranching Reboot Paddock. You can also find a link to our Discord server. So that's linktr.ee/RedHillsRancher, or just click the link in the show notes. So my guest today is Colter DeVries from the Ranch Investor Podcast, and we have a really fun discussion today. Might not be everybody's cup of tea, but that's okay. Colter has a very interesting platform designed to bring crowdfunding to rural land ownership, and over the last 15 years, the average age of farmers and ranchers has only gone up. We talk about succession planning, the inevitable upcoming shift in land ownership patterns as the older generation begins to die off. I won't spoil it for anyone, so time for some music. Roll that intro. Hey, you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take your conversations with fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. Hi, Colter. Been a while.
Hasn't been that long, Brian.
But I just had to go look. I looked at my calendar. It was June 29th the last time we spoke.
Well, I'm very glad Nick DeCastro made that introduction. Nick with Land Trust. Since then I've considered what you have told me since I interviewed you on my podcast, the Ranch Investor Podcast.
I listened to that last week, actually.
Well, you had enlightened me on the Senate, and I hadn't known that, but I had always understood that the United States Senate was not a democratically elected position. It's a republic.
Right.
And I've had a lot of hours on the road, windshield time. This last week was 12 hours. And so you get, especially in eastern Montana, when you don't have cell service anywhere, you just get your thoughts. And I've been pondering a lot of that. And that was also, I was excited to share Oliver Anthony's song with you because I knew that that would just strike a chord with you, Brian.
I you know, I saw that song on social media, and I just kind of scrolled by. I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then when you sent it to me, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I better listen to this. And I listened to it, and I'm like, all right, I get why everybody likes this. And that Oliver Anthony kid, he's real interesting. Uh, he turned down what was it, $8 million for a major record label. It's like, no, I don't want your money. I just want to make my music. I didn't make it for anybody else. I made it because I'm broke and I'm in pain and I hate life.
No persona at all. The dude is fully authentic and original. And in this day and age, when we had given up all hope on Gen Zers, he just comes out of nowhere. And I mean, it's inspiring. If nothing else comes of this, which I suspect that it has gone viral so rapidly, it has accelerated so quickly because there is something going on that he touched on. It's not just his voice, it's the lyrics, it's how it's delivered. Everyone, I'm not unique. I'm like a lot of people. The first time I heard it, it sent chills down my spine. And if nothing else becomes of that, I think it's a pretty impressive lesson to be authentic, to be original, and stick to your guns. Him turning down 8 million, I mean, what backing up his vulnerability with integrity like that's incredible.
I I'm wanting to say something about mainstream media. Like, if it wasn't for platforms that aren't necessarily controlled by big tech, like I saw that song the first time on TikTok, and the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time, and now there's other people doing remixes, like, where he'd jump into a chorus, they're throwing their own verse in, then it goes back to him doing a chorus and his verse, and then they throw a verse in, and it's pretty cool. And yeah, I've seen it on YouTube, and he's got, like, I don't know, probably millions, lots of views on YouTube, way more than I've ever got on anything. Um, but he's not on the news. I mean, haven't seen him on mainstream news. Haven't really seen him on Facebook. Haven't really seen him on the gram. It's like the mainstream media is they're all trying to suppress voices like that because it's not coming from a record label, right? He doesn't have a record label to promote him. So mainstream media is like, well, we just won't care about this guy. And
Well, and his message is not, that's not what the that's not what the propaganda at the Aspen Institute wants and the World Economic Forum. He is chart topping right now. He's surpassed Drake. He makes Drake look like an independent right now. But and that's all, like you said, I think it's halfway suppressed. That's all pure direct virility. That's me sending it to you, Brian.
yeah, and that's what it takes. It takes people like sharing things kind of privately, and we sharing the things on the platforms, like sharing it on YouTube, sharing a YouTube link through email. That's all still tracked. Like, YouTube knows that traffic came from an email link, and that's important. That's important to let the overlords, the tech, the social media overlords, let them know what the people are actually interested in instead of just what they're the data they're getting back out of the algorithm, or what they're being told should be popular.
Well, and I mean, he's a Gen Zer, and he struck something deep in America. And even so, I was at RCAF's annual convention, and love them or hate them, I was there. And I have a lot of good friends in RCAF. And even in the urinal next to me, the old guys, which you would imagine RCAF is predominantly an older generation, even those guys were saying, what the hell did the guy next to me say? He just referenced the song. They think or they don't think but I know that you do. And that was kind of the topic of RCAF. And I'm curious where your audience sits on this issue, because that was it's concerning to me when you have the World Economic Forum coming out with their 2030 agenda, and it's crazy. They tell you exactly what they're going to do. And they're going to control the money supply, one digital world currency. And it's in your best interest, Brian, that they do this because you're not capable of thinking for yourself.
Right.
And they're going to eliminate meat. One reason is because it's hard to control meat production.
Well,
It's
that's
a
bad for the
perishable
environment.
good.
I mean, it's bad for the environment.
Well, and that's one of the ways they're going to dress it up. But I mean, I tend to believe, what do all good cult leaders do? They put their masses on a vegan diet because it makes them weak and fatigued, and they can't run, they can't fight, they're just chronically ill, and they can't stand up for themselves. So yeah, let's take the proteins out, the animal proteins out, and people are more controllable that way.
Why does it seem like when a celebrity says, I'm going to go vegan to save the environment, that gets all kinds of publicity? Like, oh, this is great. This person, they're showing their commitment to save the environment. But then 6 months or a year, 2 years later, when they go, yeah, I've got some health problems and maybe I should go back to eating meat. Nobody says anything about that. Like the guys like Sean Baker is one of them. Who's the other carnivore doctor? Like,
Well, Jordan Peterson went on it.
yeah, Jordan Peterson and Sean Baker, two well-known people in carnivore movement. Why is nobody talking about them? I mean, like these guys are saying, I had these problems when I was vegetarian or when I was eating a normal diet, and I switched to all meat, all natural meat, and now they've gone away. But nobody wants to talk about that because apparently cattle farming is bad for the environment. And God, I don't know how many times I've said this. The American beef consumer wouldn't have to feel bad about rainforest destruction in Brazil, in the Amazon, if we'd quit importing beef from there.
Well, I mean, when they're virtue signaling that they're doing it for the environment to save you, Brian, because they're making a sacrifice to save you. It's not about them. They're so virtuous that they're going to be a martyr. They're going to be a Jesus Christ figure and die on the cross for you. And it's so virtuous until you try veganism and you get sick as all hell. And then your world starts falling apart. Your marriage, your family, your career, your health. I mean, what do you have without your health?
You have nothing. I mean, you have nothing. And we're told, oh, healthcare is a human, healthcare is a right now since the Affordable Care Act is law of the land. Everybody gets access to healthcare. That's great. We need healthy people. Somebody's got to pay for it. And the problem I have with it is, we've expanded government food benefits, SNAP benefits for 40 years. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, if you were on welfare food assistance, like, you got some basics, peanut butter and eggs, milk, cheese, things like that. You got staples, you got like ingredients that it took some time to craft into a meal, into a good, wholesome meal. And now it seems like, well, I had somebody on the podcast the other day telling me that they could go to people with EBT cards could go to the farmer's market. And because they're at the farmer's market, it's like they get more for their dollar. It's like 2 for 1 or something. And they could cash that in and go buy, jeans and handbags and soap and stuff, and then take that and sell it for cash to go to the store to buy Twinkies. And okay, I'm all for using SNAP benefits at farmers markets. I'm all for making sure they go farther, but they need to be for food. And when SNAP benefits and EBT cards can be used to buy ultra processed crap that's just full of sugar, shouldn't be allowed. Like, I'm sorry, you shouldn't be able to go buy that 2 liter of Pepsi and the box of fudge rounds with your SNAP card. That shouldn't be what that's for. That's my personal opinion. People can come after me if they want. I really don't care because I'll defend that till the day I die. The problem is we're giving people free money to eat crap food so we can give them taxpayer subsidized healthcare.
Oh, absolutely. I had that experience when I was in college. One of the jobs I picked up on the side was a grocer clerk. I just ran the food across the till, and of course the food, or call it food, it would be they'd ask you to run this first, and then they'd pay with EBT, and then it was the tobacco and alcohol pay with cash, run this next. Every time.
Sounds about right. It, okay, you want to buy, you're on benefits. I'm not telling you don't deserve beer. I'm not telling you shouldn't be smoking. Well, I would tell you shouldn't be smoking cigarettes because it's an expensive habit that'll kill you anyway. I just think we're living in a very strange time in human history. Up until about 50, 60 years ago, poor people were not obese. Like it was almost a lot, it was almost an impossibility to have a person living in poverty that was obese. Like the definition of poverty is you do not have enough to eat. So it's a really strange time in human history where we've got people that have overeaten sugars and carbs to the point where they're obese and diabetic and they're having health problems and they can't work. So not only so now we have to give them free health care, we're giving them free crap food to get sicker on. We're giving them free health care and we're giving them free money because they're disabled because of the diet they've been eating all their life.
I don't see that changing either.
Things like that don't like, yes, I agree. And systems like that don't change without a lot of hardship, pain, and I mean, it takes a revolution to change a system like that. Just like, we talked about on your podcast, the 19th Amendment in the Senate. So for those that haven't listened to the Ranch Investor podcast that I did with Colter, we talked about how just over 100 years ago, the 19th Amendment got passed. And what that did is it took away the state legislature's power to appoint the senators to send to Washington to the Senate and gave that power to directly elect the senators to the people of the state. And what that did is instead of the senators being nominated by the state legislature, which is an elected body, to go to Washington to serve the interest of the state, now the senators are popularity contests with the citizens to try to stay in office, and they're like, we're going to help you. So that was a huge thing to destroy the federal representative republic and move us towards, I don't know what we are now, the techno-fascist oligarchy, for lack of a better term. So that was something to take away power from us. You talked about, they, them, and sometimes I could go back and forth between conspiracy theories with, they, them, that they're controlling everything to one end. A lot of me just goes back to human nature. And these are just people that got a little taste of power, figured out how to get a little more, and they're desperate to hold on to every scrap they can for as long as they can. And you have a bunch of people at the top, and all they're doing is acting in their own self-interest. They're trying to stay in power. They're trying to enrich their friends and just trying to accumulate wealth. And that's 3% of the population. And you and I aren't it. Like, even though we're living in the wealthiest country in America, or wealthiest country in America. America's the wealthiest country in the world. We have the highest standard of living in the world, highest per capita income. We're still not like in that top 3% of the people that are actually running the things. And there's even a really interesting economic theory that if we went out today and confiscated all of the wealth in the world and redistributed it equally amongst all the peoples of the world, within 50 years, 97% of the wealth would be back in the hands of 3% of the people. Throughout history, that's how society has worked. 97% of the people are ruled by the 3% of the people that have all of the money. That's just how it works. And I don't know how to change that.
Well, I think that falls on the individual. I'm personally, the way I lead my family as a husband and a father is, one, we consider heavily what we need versus what we want. We have goals. We have a family vision statement, a family mission statement, and I just start at the nuclear family, and those values are fiscal conservatism. We're very against debt. Right now, we're we're keeping a little bit of debt because we have it at 3.5% on our house. So it's foolish to get rid of that debt right now. But we aggressively paid down our home, and no credit cards, no automobile loan. Um, we I see debt as control. I see debt as slavery, and I think anytime you owe someone, you're going to make decisions that are, I want to say, very risk averse. And I believe where I'm at being an entrepreneur that if I'm going to take my family to the next level of financial security at a young age, you have to take risk. So,
Yeah.
I mean, at the individual level, yeah, my household is all about not getting on these subscription programs, Netflix, Hulu, because that's another form of control and debt. It's about practicing safe handling of defense tools, and it is, we do identify guns, weapons as tools of defense, and we respect them, and we're very, very vigilant. Vigilance is another value in our family. It's knowing what predicaments you're putting yourself in. I mean, I watch Active Self-Protection on YouTube, and John Correa, the host of that, talks about going stupid places with stupid people at stupid hours. If you're violating any of the rules of stupid, you increase your risk of getting into an altercation. And
That's the
so,
first rule of personal security. Don't go to dangerous places.
yes, dangerous places with dangerous people at dangerous hours. And so, I mean, I think everything comes back to the individual. And, if we redistributed the wealth, a lot of that's going to go back to the top 3%, because a lot of the people on the bottom don't make the best decisions as an individual for themselves. They're quite often, in my belief, they're motivated by the human condition, their vanity, ego, gluttony, narcissism, greed. They can't help themselves from helping themselves. It's unfortunate, but it's not my monkey and it's not my circus.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to everybody just has a basic instinct to want to survive. And
Oh, sure.
every,
Food, shelter, security, survival. Yeah.
everybody just wants to survive. Everybody's just trying to act in their own, best self-interest or best interest of their family. And whatever that looks like for different people. I mean, for you and me, it looks way different than it does for somebody at the top. God, I want to talk about Hunter Biden's laptop so bad. You want to talk about it?
Absolutely.
I think it's freaking hilarious that now they have this laptop with all the evidence that's coming out. And this is the stuff that they were trying to pin on Trump for the Russia collusion narrative. This is what they tried to impeach Trump for and failed because he called this out in 2016. He called this out in 2016. And they tried to flay him alive for it. And now here we are going into yet another election cycle almost 8 years later, and we have no resolution on this laptop, on this influence peddling. Like that, from everything I've heard, from the emails and text messages that they're reading that Hunter wrote, like there's a lot of foreign entities that gave the Biden family a hell of a lot of money. And everything that I've heard about this in the last 2 weeks just reinforces the swamp is real. Now, I am not a Trump supporter. You know that. I think most of my fans know that. But I mean, he called it out. He definitely called it out. The swamp is real. That they'll go after him for trying to call it out. But now all this evidence is out there in the public, and people are just going, yeah, we're not going to do anything about it. I don't get it. Is that kind of how you get the situation?
I'm very I'll just flat out say I'm scared, Brian. I'm flat out scared that we are using public funds to fund the FBI, which is protecting one of the political parties, and I don't care which party it is. We can go full authoritarianism in either direction. Currently, it's full. Well, I'm
I
going
think
to
if they had
address.
the right Republican candidate, they wouldn't like it wouldn't matter. Like if the Republican candidate that they had was like anybody but Trump, if it was a McCain flavor or a Bush flavor, that wouldn't matter. But Trump was the wild card, I think.
Yeah, he's an outsider. He's a populist candidate, and that's very disruptive to the establishment. I mean, back in the 20s, you had prohibition, you had people getting arrested for provocative material. So there was a huge censorship of free speech and free expression in the 20s coming from ultra conservative. We're not there today. We are being censored in the interest of the left, and I'm scared because we're using taxpayer dollars to essentially put a bit in our own mouths and then handcuff us. I mean, you're using the FBI, who will reach out to Twitter and Facebook and say, "Hey, there's a dump coming. Beware."
Yeah.
By the way, we have facilitated a forum with the Aspen Institute how you guys can spin this. So reach out to the Aspen Institute. When this dump happens, here's the narrative you guys need to take, and here's what you should allow on Twitter and Facebook. The Aspen Institute, they've got your counter narrative prepared for when this dump comes. That's very scary to me, Brian.
Yes. And you look at what they're telling these social media companies to suppress and what they're telling them that it's okay to talk about. You look at how they're handling the Hunter Biden laptop thing. I mean, look, it could be like a constitutional crisis like we have never seen if they put Hunter Biden on trial for that laptop. Like, I mean, it could be major. I mean, there's never been a time in history where we've had this much proof of a president's family doing illegal crap, influence peddling, taking money from foreign investments. Like they tried for 4 years to pin stuff like this on Trump's kids. Like, oh, it's foreign business deals, emoluments clause. But nobody says a thing when the vice president's son, I mean, talking about Biden when he was vice president or Obama, getting a seat on the Ukrainian gas company's board. Really? That's okay. And it's okay that China has given the Biden family $20 million. That's okay. But we need to look at all Trump's foreign business deals. We're living in a banana republic. Like the rule of law, it doesn't mean anything anymore for the people at the top. They get to do whatever they want and they get away with it as long as you're their friend. And if you're not their friend and working against their global agenda, you're probably going to go to jail or meet one of the Clintons.
Well, that you talk about a banana republic. They are held in place with kangaroo courts. And I'll just personally say that after former President Trump's lockdowns and initiation of Operation Warp Speed, he was dead to me as a candidate. That was a violation of my civil liberties, and it was unforgivable. And when I see a leader come to the hardest point the nation has had faced since 2001, since 9/11, and to see a leader fold like that, I can't trust you. You're dead to me at that point. However, now I'm I'm awfully concerned about politicization of the Justice Department and using public taxpayer funds to investigate a political enemy, using taxpayer funds to prosecute a political enemy. That's what Russia does. And when you politicize the Justice Department, it's not going to stop there, Brian. They're going to go after the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
and they're going to keep pursuing this every which way they can through the state and city and county prosecutors. Every president has challenged the election, and I don't know to the
On both
extent.
sides.
Yeah, I don't know to the extent that past presidents have challenged the election, but that is a political issue. You put if what President Trump did on his way out was unpalatable to Americans, you put that on the electorate. That's their decision to make. They're going to show up to the polls the next time around, and I trust that they're going to be well informed to make a decision, a vote that's in their own best interest. That is a political issue. That is not a legal issue. You cannot have political parties attacking each other, especially using taxpayer funds, trying to imprison your political enemy. This is Russia in 2023, United States of America. And so I'm very, again, scared. What could happen if we see the leader of the opposition party here in the United States in prison and currently trying to put a gag order on him so he can't campaign? That's censoring your political enemy. That is everything the United States does not stand for.
Some of this goes back to 2014, the 2014 election. You you remember the rise of the Tea Party through 2012, 13, and 14 up to that election cycle?
Post Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street.
Yep.
That was a populist response. And people are pissed off because the elites in Wall Street set up the Great Recession, and Occupy Wall Street led to Tea Party movement. Yeah.
Okay. So we had the Tea Party movement, which was a freedom, small government movement at the base. A lot of libertarian values that we both love. Well, what happened was Obama administration got with the IRS and said, "Hey, all these Tea Party groups, all these conservative groups, go after their funding,
I
go
recall.
after their donators, and shut them down." So that was silencing. That was using the executive branch and executive overreach to silence a political movement. And Lois Lerner went. She got hauled in front of Congress and had to testify that that's what she did. Nothing bad ever happened. Nobody went to jail. Nobody got in trouble. The reason Donald Trump got elected is because Obama squashed the Tea Party movement before the 2014 election. Okay, if they would have let that one go and let that one run, it would have grown, and we would have had a Trump-like Republican or a more populist Republican 4 years before. Like we would have had a change in party if the Tea Party would have been allowed to raise money. I really believe that. And because Obama used the IRS to target the Tea Party, that's why we got Donald Trump as a president. That was the reaction from the electorate.
Well, Donald Trump also hit on something that people, Tea Party on the right, and there's also those on the left who are frustrated with the fourth branch of government, and that is the bureaus. The bureaus are self-serving, unelected positions, and deeply entrenched. Many of the leaders, such as Barnhart of the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, Brian, not Black Lives Matter. Barnhart,
yeah, I got it.
Barnhart has made it through several administrations. I mean, he is so deep in there. And then you got the revolving door. I mean, Vilsack is back in Department of Ag.
I was going to bring him up.
Yep. You got that revolving door. And if he's not at the Department of Ag, he'll be at Syngenta or JBS or Cargill. So you have all of that in the fourth branch of government. And that's how a party, they can use those means to attack their political enemies and use government funds to investigate their political enemies. And we've got the Department of Homeland Security, DEA, we've got the IRS. You have all these alphabet soups that you can use in a non-legal way. This is not through the legislature. This is not through Congress. This is not through the Justice Department. You can use that to attack and investigate your political enemy.
and there's no recourse. There's probably not much paper trail. And, when you have, what is it in Washington, D.C., 85+% vote Democrat. And when it goes to almost any federal agency, whether you're talking about FBI, DEA, CIA, NSA, I mean, pick your favorite 3-letter agency, 80 to 90% of them vote Democrat and donate to Democratic Party causes. And, it shouldn't be any shock to anybody if 85% of the people in the workplace align with one political party. That political party is never going to get any scrutiny, or it's not going to get near as much legal scrutiny as the opposing political party. And that is it's so disgusting to see that. I mean, just in the last 3 weeks, what's come out about Hunter Biden's laptop and the way they're treating it, the way the media is treating it. I mean, I didn't need another lesson in how corrupt the government was. This one should be waking everybody up.
Well, and I think part of that comes from the mentality that they know what's best for you, and you are a danger to yourself. They're going to help you. You just need to relinquish some liberties, some control. You shouldn't have the control. They need to have the control to make the best decision for you, Brian, because they have all the scientists, they have the engineers, the researchers, they have the funding. They've got professors at Stanford. That means something, right? That means they have the intellectual power and capabilities that you don't have, as you're just a simple guy. You're just a simple guy, Brian. You need a little help making decisions for yourself.
Yeah. Why don't you tell me what kind of car I should drive next and feed me bugs? That sounds great.
Can I get into my sales pitch?
Let's go.
So as I was sitting in Rapid City at RCAF, and we were discussing the World Economic Forum and how the elites, for lack of a better word, how they come together once a year and tell you what they plan for the world. And this is multinational. Governments don't matter. It's it's the club. Only the club matters. Those who belong in it. Nations mean nothing. Borders mean nothing. So we were discussing the World Economic Forum and how they have funded the Netherlands attempt to take away dairy farms, compulsory, so mandatory, just going to take your dairy farm. That was, attempt number one, and they're going to try it through conservation easements in the United States, which are well funded right now through the Inflation Reduction Act. There's many levers to pull, many buttons to push, many wheels to turn when it comes to how you can keep people under your thumb. And we were talking about that, and this is centralized planning coming from Klaus Schwab and Switzerland, the World Economic Forum. And so I'm sitting there thinking about what all that means for my business and brokerage, real estate, what that means for the ranchers that I serve, and Brian, what I'm looking to accomplish with real estate syndication. And I'd love to get your listeners' feedback on this. When it comes to conservation easements and the Trojan horse that is the carrot being dangled in front of landowners, get with this program and you'll be compensated handsomely. So there's a lot of carrots, and I actually had an economist on my podcast here recently talk about those carrots. He helps write farm bills. For now, they prefer the carrot over the whip. There might come a time when landowners, producers are bound by the whip. They're going to be penalized. It's going to be punitive if they don't make the changes that Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum recommend. So I'm thinking about that, and everything we love about land ownership and ranching in the West and the cowboy legacy comes down to independence, and it comes down to liberty and freedom. And with these ranches and farms getting bigger, there's getting to be fewer staunch, hardcore, anti-government, sovereign men and women out there. As these places get bigger, they become more dependent on conservation programs and farm subsidies. They become more dependent on cheap labor. So immigration programs, they become part of the welfare state where, yeah, I'll produce whatever you want me to produce, and I will I'll implement these programs, because if I don't, I'm just going to be broke. There's no economic upside to not joining the program. So I'm sitting there, and again, Brian, I'm just scared shitless what that means for my kids, my friends, my aging parents and their friends, and the people I looked up to who were staunchly independent cowboys and farmers. And it really just, it made me feel sad. I don't like seeing how dependent landowners can be and producers can be, and I don't like seeing how the government is encouraging all these what I believe are unwanted partnerships. Now you're partnering with green energy companies, you're partnering with conservation groups. I think we're voluntarily releasing a lot of our freedoms in the name of a subsidy and a program, and it's voluntary because the economics are that way. You're gonna have to take some sort of bird management program for $13 an acre on your rangeland, because that pays better than cattle.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that that's a free market response. I don't think birds quite pay better than beef does right now. Anyway, so I'm thinking, what does this mean for me? You know, my egocentrism kicked in, my self-centeredness kicked in. What does this mean for me and my business and my family, Brian? And since I'm launching a real estate syndication, I kind of thought, and I want everyone's feedback on this. I kind of thought it's more important now than ever to have more people vested in rural America. I mean vested. They put their money in it. They take an interest in it. They're up to date on what's happening with their investment in a real estate, a ranch syndication. You know, if they're one of 80 people in a pool that owns one ranch, they want to make damn sure that their principal is protected and that the future annual yield is improving. They definitely don't want to see a deterioration of your capital. So I think it's more important now than ever that we get people from the suburbs, from the densely populated Blue Islands, vested in rural America. And the best way to vest is with your money. Words saying, yeah, I support farmers and ranchers, and I buy all natural organic beef and grass-fed beef. That's good. I think they should continue doing that. But I also think that we need people who are going to suffer the consequences of consolidation, mergers and acquisitions, authoritarian, downward hierarchy of control, ownership, and production. I mean, essentially, this is decentralization, right? This is you take this one asset that was once formerly managed by one family, only serving essentially one interest of that family, and you decentralize it. Now, hopefully you have tens of thousands of people who are saying, no, I don't want windmills and conservation easements going across my asset that I've invested $50,000 in. I might be one of 80 in this pool, but no, I don't support that.
Okay, I have a couple thoughts. So since we spoke, I did a podcast with my friend Chad Ellis from Texas Agricultural Land Trust. He used to work for Noble Research down in Ardmore. I've known Chad a long time, and I'm not going to say that I have an overall favorable opinion of conservation easements, but I can see that they have their place. I mean, I can definitely see they have their place, and they can be structured however, they can be structured however you want. Like, you sell off whatever development rights you want in that conservation easement, and it doesn't necessarily have to be restrictive if later you want to come in and put a new, deer cabin, or, change some cross fences or whatever. That's number 125. If anybody wants to go check it out with Chad Ellis. Um, so I also had a conversation this morning with a friend of mine in Oklahoma, and like I had to kick him off the phone so I come sit down with you, matter of fact. And we were talking about winter feed cost. He was kind of running an idea by me that he was thinking about, buying some shortbread heifers, some party girls. Like, okay, yeah, that'll work. And we were talking about what he's getting into these cattle for, his feed cost and his yardage cost, because he's got his own yard and he put up his own feed. I'm like, that's a money making deal. And his point that he goes back to is, if I can't be profitable without subsidy, I shouldn't be in this business. Like, Tim, I agree with you. Like, 100%, I'm with you. Okay. We should not require a subsidy to be profitable in the beef business, in the cattle business. Okay. Plain and simple, like basic production businesses, producing something from nothing, mining, farming, ranching. We shouldn't be subsidized, because we're taking something from nature and selling it. That's basically what we're doing. Whether you're mining, farming, ranching, we're taking nature and selling it to you. Why are we subsidizing some parts of this so much? It doesn't make any sense. And as we move to the future with interest rates going sky high, I mean, what's money cost today?
8%.
8%. There you go. Money's 8% or better. A year ago, it was almost free. I mean, a year ago, it was 2.5, 3.25, maybe. I mean,
Yep.
that's basically free money. Now we're looking at 8%. I'm surprised we've stabilized at 8 and it hasn't gone higher. So every year you're going to have to beat that inflation number to grow. Well, it's not like they're giving us, that much more for our cattle at the barn. It's not like we're getting that much more of the beef dollar. We're not getting it. Who is getting it? As our costs increase, we either have to take less money ourselves, increase efficiency, or increase turnover. When you're running at capacity, you can't really increase turnover anymore. But when you have to start competing in the marketplace against everybody that's getting, corn, soybeans, distillers grain, whatever, that's already that's a subsidized crop, you're competing against that. Grass-fed beef guys are competing against that. If I wanted to go buy more land, I'm not competing against other ranchers to go buy land. I'm competing against deer hunters to buy land that won't produce anything. Most of them won't produce anything on it. The being profitable without subsidy, that kind of plays back into conservation easements. A conservation easement could be a tool to help you keep the land in the family and continue to be profitable without subsidy. I've also had several conversations in the last 3-4 months with folks talking about biodiversity credits or ecological credits, which that's really exciting, but that's not quite mature. I think that's got a little bit of growing yet before it's mature and those projects are actually on the ground. But the big one is carbon credits. I mean, you're talking, $15 an acre. I mean, how's $30 an acre sound? That sounds pretty good to a guy that's barely scraping by. $30 an acre for not having to add anything else. And my friend Hobbs and I have said this. I think it was episode 122 about 2 months ago. We both said this, that grass-fed beef will be a byproduct or a waste product of the carbon sequestration industry. So does that mean I'm going to be taking subsidy somewhere? Well, yeah, it does. Because the government is telling companies, you got to reduce your carbons, and this is just one way for them to reduce their emissions by buying the carbon that I store. Is it a shell game? Is it a cap and trade? Are they actually going to reduce their emissions? Yes, yes, and no. I mean, they're not actually going to reduce their emissions. They're just going to try to find enough offsets to buy so they can continue business as normal. That's what all these companies that have made all these environmental pledges to go green and cut their emissions are going to do. Like United Airlines saying we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030. Like, bet. Like, I wish I could I wish I could get some short options for 2030 when they have to make the announcement that there's absolutely no way that they can fly airplanes carbon neutral. But like we talked about, like all the influencers going vegan, huge publicity when they make the claim and when they start down the road. United, all the airlines, they got lots of press and publicity when they said, we're going to go green by 2030. We're going to have zero emissions by 2030. No, you're not. And when they miss their targets, nobody gives a shit. Their stock price doesn't drop when they announce they missed their targets.
No accountability.
None. There's zero accountability at the top, but the people at the top expect us to be 100% accountable for all the shit we don't know.
My position, conservation easements, yes, they are a tool that landowners can use, and it's voluntary currently. So I'm not going to, I certainly do not want to get in the middle of a voluntary transaction, especially for private property rights. Someone who owns their full bundle of rights has every right to make that decision for themselves. For me, I think I'm getting into vesting, having people from the suburbs and the densely populated cities, the Blue Islands, having them vested in a ranch, to me, is going to make the threat of compulsory actions, it's going to make it less. So when you have a vested interest in something, you're going to stand up and protect your interests, what's best for you. And like with the Dutch farmers, when that vote happened, they were going to start eliminating dairy farms and cows because of methane gases, cow farts. And so the Netherlands are at a point where they have no more land for development. So they need those dairy farms for development. And what a great way to sell it is that cows are bad for the environment. What are there, let's say 5,000, 10,000 dairy farmers in the Netherlands. I'm not sure what the number is, but it can't be very big. What an easy group to bully. You can't get the masses there. They're not going to oppose you, just 5,000 guys, kind of like RCAF. So what an easy group to bully. And my thing is with this ranch real estate syndication, pooled investment, you're not going to be able to bully 10,000 people who have an interest, $50,000 in rural real estate. They're going to stand up and say, no, actually, we're going to defend. If I'm owning this land and leasing to this dairy farmer, and currently that's the highest and best use of the land, and that's how I make my annual return, protection of my capital, you're going to step in and say, no, you're not going to bully these dairy farmers. They're taking care of my asset, and this is how I get my return. This is part of my investment portfolio. I'm on their side. And I'd like to see more of that with the United States. I'm on their side. I will step up and help defend the independent rancher.
Okay. I'm wondering where they're going to get their milk and their cheese from. If they're closing down all their dairy farms, what are they going to do? Just import it? And that leads us down the path that we're in this country. Oh, we don't want that in our backyard. We're going to close that dairy down, or we're going to close that pig farm down in our backyard because we don't want it. But we'll just go to the store and keep buying those products that are now shipped in from further away. You know, does the dairy industry, like from the 30,000 foot view, do they likely have some problems? Yeah. Could most dairies make some changes to be a little more ecologically friendly or use less inputs? Probably. But everybody's got to make those decisions kind of on a tactical level because everybody's situation is going to be different. When you have a government coming in with top down management, it never works. It never works for the benefit of the people. Top down management only benefits those at the top. And it's to, keep the ones at the top and empower the ones at the top. Bottom up management, community level management is generally for the betterment of the community. And, yeah, okay, we're all one world, we're one big world community. No, we're not. We're one world community of probably, a billion different little communities, because it's the family ties and the small family unit, like you were talking about the nuclear family. I wish more people thought like that. That traditional gender roles aside, there's things that men are better at, and there's things that are women are better at, and you have to play on it off each other's strengths. And your job as a husband and wife is to raise good replacements, is to raise good replacement human beings. Like, that's how I see it.
Well, you bring up a important topic to me is community. And I've gone around to Eastern Montana and I've pitched some different people on this and said, I'm thinking of putting this ranch under contract, pending contingent upon pooling the funds, syndication, $4 million ranch, 80 people, 80 investors, $50,000 each. What are your thoughts? And a lot of them naturally have mixed responses, mixed feelings about it. And I keep hearing conservation of community and the deterioration of culture, especially Eastern Montana, which is very remote, very rural. It has its own culture and it has its own community dynamics and it has its own community feeling. And it is unique. It is actually worth protecting, but it's also worth sharing, in my opinion. And I said, okay, well, the alternative is this ranch is going to get listed. And when it does, I believe the probability of a Texas elk hunter buying this is 80%. I mean, that's where my money is. You're going to have a Texas elk hunter who visits the place for 45 days a year at most. Otherwise, it's locked gates. And I can't even guarantee you that it'll be leased out for grazing to the neighbor. Certainly not big enough that this Texas elk hunter is going to hire a cowboy and a foreman to run 150 head, 200 head. And so I'm like, so what's worse here? Is the one guy who owns it and locks gates and hunts it for 45 days a year, is that worse than 80 people coming into your community wanting to share your values, share your experience, and bringing their money from Philadelphia into your cafe, bringing their money from San Jose, California, into your hotel? Is that worse? I don't think it is. I think that's a great thing, and that's something that Eastern Montana would tremendously benefit from. 80 new individuals who have taken an interest, both economically, financially, and culturally, emotionally. They have taken an interest, tangibly and intangibly, in what you have here. I think that's a good thing.
Those 80 people, even if only half of them came every year, the money they would spend in that community is way more than that one Texas elk hunter would spend. But the community quote leaders will look at that hunting and say, oh, hunting is a huge economic opportunity. We need to have more hunters. We need to have more hunters. No, we don't need to have more hunters. We need to have more landowners that are interested in managing their land for maximum biodiversity, which in turn increases habitat for all the wildlife. So I wrote down here while you were talking, and I've heard this several other podcasts, on social media about, and this is more like Western Montana, like the mountains. that there are places where the cost where real estate has gone up 300% in 12 months. That people that used to be able to rent houses are now homeless because they got priced out of their rental houses because of all the coastal money pouring in. Like I can't remember any town names specifically, but they all seem to be, the western Montana mountain towns like Billings, Whitefish, Kalispell, those kind of places. Like they've just blown up. And okay, it's great. It's great if you're selling, if you want to have something you want to sell, that's great. It's not so great if you're still there trying to make a living and pay wage, because now all the the labor force that's there, they're getting priced out of their homes and rentals, so they're asking for more money. Land prices are going sky high out of control, and not only that, there's a dilution of the culture, I think. And now let me explain that. So the longer you stay in a place, the more like the people of that place you become. Like you become immersed in the culture. And there's a stable mass of people. Okay. There's a stable mass of culture. And that stable mass of culture can absorb so many new people a year. Okay. Without changing the culture, without changing it too much too fast. But what I think is happening in not only Montana, but I think it's happening in Texas. I think it's happening in probably hundreds of other areas and communities up and down the Great Plains, is we're having mass influx of coastal money, Chicago money, East Coast money, West Coast money. We're having all these people that have discovered remote work and that cities suck and they don't want to be in them anymore. And they're coming to places and they're seeing houses that would be $1 million in California. And they're going, that's 110. Well, shit, I'll just write 150 just to make sure I get it. And they buy up property, they price the locals out of the market, and then they wonder why there's nobody working anymore. They wonder why they can't get anybody to work at their coffee shop to serve them their $9 latte. Well, congratulations. You just ruined the area that you love because you brought all of your money here. So there's something to be said about like losing the culture of your area and of your community because too many people come in too fast. And yeah, we are a free country. If you got the money, you can come buy the ranch next to me and plow it all up. There's not a whole lot I can do about it. You could buy everything around me and put up 100-story hotels. There's nothing I can do about it. And I'll drive my tax, it'll drive up my taxes, piss me off, especially if you don't maintain your fences. So we also, in a lot of our communities in the West, we need tourism dollars. Western Colorado runs on tourism dollars. Southeast Utah runs on tourism dollars. Imagine a lot of Western Montana and Idaho runs on tourism dollars. And without those dollars, communities suffer. But what's the cost of all the tourism dollars? The loss of your culture, the loss of your peace of mind, the loss of your sanity from all the extra traffic and people coming in the area. I go back and forth to some of my friends and family about, man, we really love our Red Hills. I mean, you seen a picture behind me. It's pretty. There's some really cool roads. There's some really great scenic drives. I'm not putting them on Onyx. I'm not putting them on All Trails. I'm not going to post about them on Facebook because I don't want to share this place with another 10,000 people every weekend. Would it be great for the local economy? Sure, but I don't own any of those businesses yet. So if they want it, they can go get it. I just don't want my roads clogged up with a bunch of tourists.
Well, the value of exclusivity to you is very high. And the value of exclusivity to the Texas elk hunter who's going to buy this ranch, inevitably, if it's not my pooled syndication, he values that exclusivity very high as well. And that's good. I like that private property right. I think that's to me, that's a very personal, valuable right as well. It's hard to put a price on that one. It's reflected in the market. There's some price on it. It's reflected with open access hunting conservation easements as well. Those are out there. So you can put a price on it. I would say conservation of culture is a difficult one because nothing is static. We are always changing. The gentrification of the Native Americans happened very quickly. The change of their culture when homesteaders came in, that was a very rapid change of culture for them. And the homesteaders came in with more money, more power. That was gentrification, and that's what's happening in the U.S. or in Montana today. Is the cowboy is being gentrified. It's a market force bigger than me. There's nothing I can do about that. I do think that
You can blame Taylor Sheridan in Yellowstone for that one.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, that was a multi-billion-dollar movement is what he created, and it was legitimately a multi-billion-dollar movement. With assimilation, I do see the pooled investment of 80 passive investors, limited partners. I do see that as like a slower assimilation and not so forced that, hey, I just came in, I bought this ranch, I'm going to buy 3 more around me, new fences, new gates, make sure no one's getting in. And I don't want to go too much down the inclusivity path, but I think the rural communities would be more inclusive to some of your more average Americans who are like, hey, I just want to come out here once a year with my family and see the stars, listen to the birds, peace and quiet, not see any chemtrails above me from the jet airliners. And
we're not staring at you because of your skin color. We're staring at you because we've never seen you before and you're just different than what we've seen in the area. And we're just trying to get a good look and we're curious. Nobody's staring at you because they think you don't belong. We're just trying to figure you out. That's all.
Funny thing about virtue signaling and inclusivity and cultural appropriation is when Microsoft does their recognition of what they call like indigenous lands or First Peoples, there is no bigger sleight of hand than recognition that we dominated you. Every time Microsoft does, or like the Seattle Supersonics or the Los Angeles Rams or Qantas down in Australia, every time they land, they give recognition to the Aboriginals, Indigenous, First Peoples. There's no bigger like thumbing your nose at a people than saying, hey, we're going to recognize you. We're going to recognize you because we have the right, we have the authority to do that. We're the ones in power who dominated you. And that is so funny to me. So funny how you can snub the people and dress it up like you are doing them a solid and not paying them any sort of tax. Like, hey, we took your land. I have my corporate headquarters on here. Maybe I'll pay you $10,000 a month because my corporate headquarters are on your indigenous First Peoples land.
Oh, no, now you're getting into some ESG mandate shit here, Colter.
It's just so funny that they think they're being virtuous and they're really being mean. It's downright mean to whip someone's ass and then rub it in their face.
I see what you're saying, and I never thought of it like that. You know, I've said several times over the last few years, you know, and I identified the ranch. Like it was originally part of the Comanche Range. It was part of the Plains Indians territory. You know, several different tribes use this area. So I've got kind of a different perspective now on First Nations people in North and South America. Because I just finished, there's 2 books that I've read since the last time we talked. 1491 and 1493, both of them by Charles C. Mann. And they talk about what between the two books, they talk about what South American civilizations were like, the Incas and the Aztecs and, the Mesoamerican civilizations, what they were like. And they talk about what some of the things from the early Spanish records they found in the plains and in the Southeast and on the East Coast. The second one, 1493, goes in more into like effects from what they call the Columbian Exchange, which is when, you know, the Americas had contact with Europe and with Asia, because there were Spanish traders, there were Spanish traders, there were Chinese traders. Like the Spanish were going all the way to the Philippines in the 1600s. Like that's kind of wild. Like they were walking across Mexico, building boats, and then sailing to the Philippines to do trade with the Chinese. Like there's a lot.
Super wild.
There's a lot of history we're not really being told and has just been kind of glossed over for the last 50 years. So, we learned in school about smallpox blankets, about the government giving smallpox blankets to the Native Americans. That happened. That's a fact. Smallpox probably came over. They're thinking it came over in 1493 on the second voyage, and got to the island of Hispaniola, and it was about 1520 before smallpox left Hispaniola and it actually came to Central America, and then it started, all up and down through the Americas. There was also malaria, which you hear about malaria. I think of the Panama Canal. That's not where malaria came from. Malaria comes from the two strains of malaria that are real bad that killed a bunch of people 100 years ago: Africa and England. That's where malaria came from. And then we also got this charming little thing called yellow fever. So between malaria, smallpox, and yellow fever, that was 95% of the Native Americans that were alive in 1500 weren't alive in 1700. So, and that's this continent. That's our continent, right? So if 90 to 95% of the people disappear within 100 years, any civilization that Europeans encountered after that was a shattered band of people trying to forget a catastrophe and rebuild and go on. When the Spanish finally started exploring the plains in the 1500s and 1600s, I mean, the first couple expeditions, there were people, there were cities. They came back 20, 30 years later. They didn't find shit. Why didn't they find shit? Because they brought European disease and everybody died behind them. That's why they didn't find anything. I mean, there's places in the southeast where if you walk out of a structure for a week, I mean, the jungle will take it back, the swamp will take it over.
Right. Yeah.
And they found huge Native American civilizations up and down the Arkansas River, 2 hours east of me. Didn't even, they think that maybe there was several 100,000 people living on about 50 miles, up and down about 50 miles of the Arkansas River. Like, oh, that's cool. Nobody ever thought about that. Nobody told me that in school. How come nobody told me this crap in school, Colter? So, like I said, I have a different view, I guess, or I'm looking at Native Americans through a different lens. Okay, yeah, I'm ranching on Comanche and Kiowa Apache land. Okay, that it is what it is.
I disagree with that. You're ranching on Brian Alexander's land, and it comes with some history that is unique. And I my personal belief is I'm interested in history. I do appreciate the archaeological stories, guns, germs, and steel. To me, that's very fascinating. And like where I'm at, some of these ranches are mostly Crow or Cheyenne. But before them, we don't know who it was. If the homesteaders hadn't come out here, the Crow and the Cheyenne probably would have been dominated by the Sioux. They were a more advanced warring society, a larger, more developed tribe who was expansionist. The Sioux wanted to expand and dominate other tribes, and they were doing very well at it. So it probably would have become Sioux. I think those are stories worth sharing. I think that's pretty cool to step up to any ranch and say, well, we know that relics from this area date back 10,000 years, and we believe that at that time it would have been some tribes that are probably now more southern United States. And I think I also like the history. I don't know if I need to um, say who it belongs to, because I do like to say, well, this part of the DeVries place, that map in the back, my family's, that was the Martillas before the Martillas were the Looking Box. And before the Looking Box was the Crow, and how the Crow would have operated it, how they would have lived on it is different than how the Looking Box lived on it, because the Looking Box would have lived on it. And I think those are really cool stories worth sharing. I'm not sure that I need to say that this was their land. It was their land at the time, but not time memoriam.
It was only theirs for a little while. Like,
Yeah.
was it before it was the Crows?
Right. We
Oh,
don't know. And that would be very interesting to learn, like the movement of peoples. I think the movement of peoples is so fascinating.
I if I had a time machine, I think 1490. Like, if I had a time machine, I'd love to go back to 1490 and just see what the plains looked like. Like, let's count buffalo and let's count people and see.
You better wear your mask if you were going to do that.
In my mind, I was like, I'm in like a flying tic tac. I'm a UFO flying tic tac, just up there maneuvering around counting, and I'm not going to have any contact because, I'm sure I'm carrying all sorts of weird diseases that they never heard of in 1490.
So can I circle this back on you? Epigenetics. If white Europeans had a higher tolerance to disease and maybe some toxins such as alcohol, nicotine, and definitely a higher tolerance to fats and carbs, that's epigenetics. Do you think that as the United States becomes fatter and our diets continue with lots of carbs, lots of sugars, lots of fats, lots of salts, that eventually we're just going to breed a tolerant population, and the diseases from obesity will subside naturally because our bodies genetically will be responding to the natural environment around us?
No, I don't think so. I think our diet changed too fast in the last 40 years. I really think that the standard American diet has changed too much too fast. Let's just say 70. Let's just go back to the 1950s. And I'm not sure why I picked that, but it just seems like people that lived through the 50s, they're going out now. But I see the 50s, the 60s, maybe even in the 70s is the last time we kind of had, I'll say this again, I'll catch hell for it, an appropriately sized population. And by that, I mean not fucking obese, right? I mean, you look at pictures of people on the beach in the 80s and you're starting to see some whales. Like, you look at pictures from the 70s and there's very few large people. You look at pictures from the 60s and there's very few large people. You look at pictures from the 90s, there's a bunch. You look at pictures, like, go to the beach today. Like, that's, or just go people watch. It just seems like in the last 40 years, we've gone from a small percentage of the population being obese to everybody, it seems like. And when you see somebody that's not obese, it's like, ooh, there's a skinny person. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it's just the places I go. But, so back to epigenetic tolerance. Okay. So smallpox isn't bad if you catch it when you're a kid, kind of like chickenpox, which, very similar disease. Smallpox when you're young, if you catch it, a young child can fight it off very often and continue on. Malaria is not like that. Like, people don't generally get resistance to malaria depending on when they get it. Like, you get it, you've got it, that's it. And I'm not a disease expert, but malaria won't kill you. It just makes you feel like you want to die for 2 weeks to a month at a time. And then you get a little better and then it'll come back. And then you get better and then it'll come back. So it's one of those wonderful gifts that keeps on giving. Yellow fever to an unvaccinated, when it gets introduced to a novel population. This is another one that, like, if a baby gets it, you never notice, but it's fatal to a adult that never had the childhood antibodies, and it's fatal like 40% of the time. So if you got smallpox, which is 40 to 50% fatal, malaria, which takes your labor effort, what you're capable of producing, and basically cuts that in half because you're sick half the time and can't do anything, and yellow fever, which kills 40 to 50% of people, you know, that's where the natives went. And so the Europeans, when they came, they'd been around smallpox because that was a European disease. I think it like came from pigs or cows or whatever. That was a European disease. So they grew up being exposed to it. They had the childhood antibodies. And when that disease was introduced to a novel population that had never developed antibodies, killed a whole bunch of them. And it was probably more lethal to the natives than it ever was in Europe. And the same thing with yellow fever. So back to epigenetics, I think our diet has changed too fast. Like, we went from in the span of one generation of human beings, okay, we went from eating good healthy food to eating ultra processed crap. Like, went from 95% good healthy food, 5% sweets and sugars, to 95% carbs and sugars, and 5% that might actually be good or healthy for you. And the nutritional guidelines the government keeps putting out, they keep pushing people towards ultra processed foods that are full of fat and sugar. And it's utter madness. So epigenetic adaptation takes generations, and it has to be, and it's a slow process. And I don't like talking about people like in this kind of frame. So I'm going to switch the conversation to cattle. Okay. So the cattle, I bought a bunch of cattle out of the sale barn. Okay. You don't know how they've been treated. You don't know how many needles they've had in their neck. You don't know what they've been fed on. You don't know what the ranch looked like. Okay. There was a lot of them that could not succeed and rebreed on my program because it was a major epigenetic change for them. It was a major environment change. It was a major diet change, and it was a major handling change for probably over 80% of my cattle. Some of them couldn't make it. So I've now have my second round of calves on the ground that were bred on the ranch. I've got calves on the ranch that were born from heifers that were born on the ranch. So I'm in my epigenetically, I'm in my second generation now. And I'm starting to see animals that are doing what I want them to do. Moderating frame size, adding more adding more meat on the bone. And they don't eat a whole lot. They're not always at the salt lick. They're not always at the protein tub, and they don't stand in the water. So I think our diet changed too fast. And, we're also talking about epigenetics in cattle and how fast we can move epigenetics in cattle. Well, from breeding to maturity, you're looking at, unless you're using a lot of high energy feed, you're looking at 3 years from breeding to you're getting an idea what the animal is going to look like at maturity. So then you make another change. You got to wait 3 years for that. You make another change. You got to wait 3 years for that. So it takes a long time. It takes time with cattle to move, to generate that epigenetic drift, to move towards your goal, right? And that's a function of, you've got to have the mother pass on traits and pass on that genetic knowledge to the fetus. That has to happen. And with only barely one generation of human beings since this mass dietary shift, and our comparatively long lifespans and low reproductive rate compared to our cow herd, epigenetically we're not there. Like it'll take 2 to 3 to 4 generations to catch up with that kind of a change. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my generation, I'm fifth generation Montanan and fifth generation on this ranch, but that's every 30 years.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of time for gene expression. Or there is, would there be a lot of time for gene expression in that? It's I agree with you. It's going to be slow, but I like to believe that I think this is the way, this is the new world, Brian. This is the new world we live in. And I do think our bodies will adapt so that we're not sickly because our genes, our DNA has the will to live, the will to survive. And so if we're constantly sickly because of a diet full of sugars and carbs, processed everything, you're not seeing it today, but I do think that we will.
So thinking some more about that. Okay, so when we give cattle a good steady diet of forage, when they're out in the pasture and they're eating diverse forages and they're balanced, okay, your gain rate is going to be lower than what it would be, on a goddamn, I forgot the term, a TMR on a mixed ration in a feedlot. Every time the cow in the pasture is going to gain less than the cow in the feedlot on TMR. Now, that cow in the pasture eating grass and quote low energy forage, that's what low energy native grass, she's going to have a slower metabolic rate. Okay. It takes longer to break down those long chain starches and carbs in the rumen. It takes longer for the bacteria in the rumen to do its thing. You throw a little bit of carbs and sugar in there, some grains, some corn, it supercharges it. It also changes the rumen pH, which we all know, towards more acidic. Acid in the body, acidity in the body is bad. We want the body to be alkaline. But metabolic rate is also tied to the mitochondria, which mitochondria are such a cool thing. And a lot of people don't know this, but the mitochondria that's in your cells, in each one of your cells, has its own DNA. And you get your mitochondria not from your father, not from a combination of father and mother. You get your mitochondrial DNA only from the mother. So the mother gives the child the blueprint for the mitochondrial DNA. And what the mitochondria is, that's the powerhouse. That's actually the power unit in the cell that turns the raw things into the energy that the cell needs. Okay. And that mitochondria, that's what's responsible for taking sugars and fats and turning them into energy that the body can use. So that's where we get epigenetics from. Okay. Cattle, whether we're talking about cattle or human, okay, we're basically a big walking sack of microbes and other organisms. Okay. A cow is just a big fermentation tank on 4 legs. It's more important to feed the bacteria in the cow's stomach than it is to feed the cow. Because if you feed the cow's rumen, you feed that bacteria correctly, the bacteria feeds the cow. Similarly, we feed our mitochondrial DNA, and the mitochondrial DNA feeds our cells. We only get that from the mother. So that's only 1/2 of our epigenetic makeup. So it's and that's for every mammal. Okay. That holds true for every mammal. Every mammal has mitochondria in every cell, and that mitochondria has DNA that only comes from the mother. So you inherit your metabolism from your mother, or most of it, because mitochondrial DNA controls your metabolism. So if mom eats a bunch of processed food and sugars and carbs during pregnancy, epigenetically, that's going to drive the fetus to want to desire those foods more, whether it's because of the bacterial colony that animal is starting with in the rumen, or whether that's how the mitochondrial DNA are coded to start up. That's what they're going to be looking for, right?
Can they process them more efficiently, though?
Yes, I think that's true. But over time, are we processing the wrong substances more efficiently? I Okay, I'll just say it again. There's no use hitting bullseyes if you're aiming at the wrong target. So, yeah, epigenetically, are we getting more efficient at at being able to eat these sugars and carbs? I would argue that our bodies are doing exactly what they're programmed to do. Is when you have excess sugar and carbs, you store that as fat for when times are bad. The fat of the land. You've heard that expression, living off the fat of the land, fat of the land. The human body can't survive without fat. Like, it's just a fact. You can't survive just eating rabbits. Rabbits don't have enough fat in their muscle. Sure, they're ultra high protein, they're really lean meat. You can't survive on rabbit alone. It doesn't have enough fat. It won't fuel your body. So it's not necessarily the fat you eat that's bad. At least that's how I've always understood it. If you eat something that has fat in it and your body can't use it, it cycles that right on out. If your body eats something with a lot of sugars and carbs and you can't use, and your body doesn't need that energy immediately, that energy gets stored as fat for later use. At least that's how I've always understood it. So if we're trying, it's one thing to talk about epigenetics and how, whether we're talking about bovine nutrition is shifting or human nutrition is shifting. What's the goal? Like, yes, there's drift happening. But which way? But it's not going, I don't think in people that it's going a good direction. Like, I don't think that we're going to end up as a healthier population by eating more processed food. I just don't see it. And I don't see cattle being healthier when they're fed a TMR for 18 months straight. I mean, there's lots of health problems that whole side of the industry does not want to talk about.
Well, potentially in 5 generations, the average human will be 7 feet tall and 300 pounds. Maybe that's the response.
It very well could be. Average height keeps going up. Average weight keeps going up. I mean, average weight goes up because people just eat more, but average height, long bone growth. Yeah, people are definitely getting taller. I mean, it seems like, when I was a kid, everybody was 6 feet. Now everybody's 6.5, and I'm having to look up and it's annoying as hell. It'll take a long time for it to epigenetically express in humans. I mean, cattle rebreed when they're 3 years, 2, 3, so that's a pretty quick cycle. Takes 7 times longer usually for human reproductive cycles. So it's going to take a lot longer. And so how long have we been feeding cattle high energy manufactured diets? I would say that a lot of it goes back to the mid 50s. First feedlots down around Hereford, Texas. So mid 50s. So yeah, we've got 5, 6, 7 generations of cattle or more that have been exposed to high energy feed. Look at a lot of the Angus cows that we've got right now. There's some that went way too far on the big side. And we've got 16 to 1,800 pound cows that just bleed money all over the place because they're so inefficient. But oh man, look how big she is. Look at how much she can gain. Look at how much she can meet. Look at how much meat's there. Efficiency, that's one of those targets. You got to make sure you're hitting you're hitting the right bullseye and you're not aiming at the wrong one. Because there's no use in being 100% effective, 100% efficient if you're 0% effective.
Going down the path of epigenetics is dangerous.
Yes.
It's a good way to have some activist journalists go out, find this podcast transcript and say that social engineers are they're referring back to their Hitler days of reading Mein Kampf and social engineering, and epigenetics is a dangerous conversation.
It's it is. It really is. And you've got to it's difficult to draw a line, when you're thinking about it, between thinking about bovines and human beings.
Well, and that's what I mean. My wife, she hates when I bring up comparing cattle to humans, because she's pregnant right now, and sometimes you'll drop that comment that she's got her second calf. This should be easier than the first calf, and all in good jokes, but she does not like the bovine references to the human experience.
I got to say this, okay? I'm not going to name names, but I have a friend who's pregnant right now, and she's been complaining about how hot it's been all summer.
Yeah.
I just want to make the comment, you should have thought about that when you turned bulls out.
Well, I mean, we tried to do the 45-day window for a better calving program, but
All right. Tell me about our calf convention.
yeah. Quit going down this dangerous path.
Yeah, well, let's move on. How was our calf?
Our calf, it was actually, Brian, I sensed a lot of doom and gloom.
Really?
Even with $2,000 calves, you ranchers are making a killing this year. You guys are going to be paying lots of taxes. If you are a libertarian Tea Party person, I think you might get flagged for the IRS audit, all the money you're making this year. So I mean, things are good in that sense, but
They can try. I've got a good accountant.
In the Caymans and Panama.
No, he's just up in Pratt County, but he's pretty good.
So I mean, the between the anti-meat, cows kill the climate movement, between the Inflation Reduction Act funding various conservation programs, the independent rancher getting, especially my generation, looking at subsidies as an entitlement. It's absolutely become a static, solid program where you just think, oh, if I'm going to buy some cows and a tractor, put subsidies on the P&L, it's going to be there. That's kind of today's new business plan. Between that and the belief that these good times with calf prices can't last, there's too much downward pressure from the grocers who are consolidated. Safeway, there's not a lot of competition between grocers, just like there's not a lot of competition between packers, and both of those entities do not like expensive beef, because people who go into grocery stores, beef is what they want, and if it's really expensive, they can't buy other things at a higher margin. The other things have a much higher margin than beef does at the grocer, so they don't want expensive beef at the grocery stores. The packers, their margins are hurt by expensive beef, because they're negotiating with the grocers. So there's a lot of this downward pressure where everyone's saying it can't last. And you got the average age there at our calf was probably 65 was the average age, maybe even a little older. Some of those guys have been hit with grasshoppers for 3 years in a row. Some of them have been hit with a drought for 2 out of the last 5 years at least. And it just felt, it was kind of an unspoken like doom and gloom. Like, I think a lot of these guys were waiting for the guy next to them to sell the cow herd. They don't want to be the first one to sell the cow herd, but a lot of them were thinking about it, that it's time to run someone else's yearlings, someone else take all the risk, to capitalize on bred cows right now. But they don't want to lose that street cred of being a cow calf producer. That comes with a lot of pride, comes with legacy and heritage. And I think a lot of them were waiting to hear who's going to be the first to move, and it just did not seem optimistic, Brian.
I think there's a lot of guys that pay $100 a calf to play cowboy because they want to be in the cow calf business. Like it, but then again, somebody's got to raise the calves. Like somebody's got to raise the calves. I don't want a future where Tyson and Cargill and JBS we run their calves because they own the cows and they have a cow factory. They have a cow breeding farm, and those cows stand in a pen. They get serviced, and they drop a calf every year without fail. And those calves get packaged, and they send them out to ranches, here in Flint Hills to gain on grass. Look, I'm gonna sell out cows, and I'm gonna go back to custom grazing. I'm gonna custom graze for a guy that's doing grass-fed beef and trying to sell some local, and he's already got a marketing chain in California, Kansas City. He's already got a marketing outlet in Kansas City. He's got good client base. Makes a lot more sense for me to partner with him and run his cattle than try to build my own program in parallel to try to sell into the same market he's selling in to the same people he's selling in. Yeah, I don't need all that premium. I mean, I know where my margins are at, and I know who butters my bread, and I know I can make it, and I know I can have an easier life, maybe not necessarily gross as much money, but I can have an easier life going back to custom grazing. But then I always think somebody's got to grow the cows. Somebody's got to grow the cows. Somebody's got to breed cows that fit the environment. And if we let Tyson, JBS, Cargill, and NCBA have their way, we'll all be contract growers. We'll all be contract growers on leased land, and nobody will own cows anymore except them.
It certainly seems like we're headed down that path. I think $2,000 calves might have slowed that down a little bit, but before $2,000 calves, if you're actually sitting down looking at your P&L, and whether you were measuring profit per acre or profit per head, and say your profit per head was $400, so for the whole ranch, and someone with yearlings is offering you 450, the equivalency of $450 an animal unit, then it's a no-brainer. Then, I mean, the numbers don't lie. And that's one guy I was talking to. He said, look, before $2,000 calves, it was like the numbers don't lie. They're yelling at me. They're sitting there on the paper and they are screaming at me what the optimal decision is. And especially at my age, this is an older gentleman at my age, pre-potential recession. In a recession, equipment is not worth shit, has very little salvage value. Why wouldn't I sell my cows, sell my equipment, and run yearlings for $450 per animal unit? That's no risk. It's pretty easy life. I'll pay the taxes on my equipment and pay the taxes on my cows. I'm happy to do that. So I think we're headed down that path, Brian.
And the good part about custom grazing is if you really want to, you can go spend all winter on the floor, all winter on the beach in Florida, drinking pina coladas.
Next to a bunch of North Dakota dryland wheat farmers.
Oh, we'll get started on those guys.
Oh man, what else I learned? Learned at RCAF is we're not all in this together. Boy, they do not like farmers.
What do you mean by that?
Farmers, they believe that the farmers are getting all the subsidies, which is driving up the price, the cost of feed, putting downward pressure on their calves. Farmers in areas like the Western Dakotas, they have the economic and financial incentive to go out and pay more for land that they can break out of either prairie or some form of perennial grass. So farmers are out competing the cow calf guy in land markets, and farmers are competing for resources with the cow calf guy. Um, yeah, it was like the new enemy is not just the global elite, it's like the global elite and farmers.
That's a fair point. And so where do you draw the distinction between a farmer, a rancher, and a cattleman? And okay, that don't answer that. There's probably some people that would identify as a farmer that don't own a tractor and all they have is cattle. And there's probably some people that would identify as a rancher whose cattle never leave a pen. So it's a very, very, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's when you get right down to the nuts and bolts, from a society level, okay, what you're saying is true. From a 30,000 foot view, there's nothing wrong with what you're saying. But when you get a room of 15, but when you get 15 guys in a room, there's going to be 15 different stories on why that works, or why that's what they need to do. And won't name any names again, just kind of speaking broadly. So there's a gentleman I know with our calf. He's got cattle, and that's his primary deal. He's got a little feedlot on the place, and he raises almost everything that he feeds to the cattle. Okay. If you're growing corn, soybeans on there, even if they're for your own cattle, there's probably some sort of government subsidy involved in that crop that you're benefiting from. And I'll even go as far as to say just about everybody that's not in the grass fed business, if you're feeding an input, if you're feeding cubes, if you're feeding any kind of grain, you're benefiting from subsidy. If you're feeding goddamn wet sugar beet pulp, you're benefiting from government subsidy. Okay. Like, pretty much the guys that don't get the subsidies are the guys that are doing direct to consumer grass fed. Like, there's just nothing out there for guys like me to feed that subsidy trough. Carbon credits, biodiversity credits, sure, bring them my way, because that's rewarding me for something that I've been doing. Like, carbon credits are rewarding my good management. These biodiversity credits, if they ever come, they're going to be rewarding good management. They're going to be rewarding not just the pounds of beef that I can grow. Like, they're going to reward things like the dick sissels, the northern bobwhites, right? They're going to be paying for biodiversity, for the birds, for all the habitat. Like, great. Let's have more of that on a voluntary basis. So I had somebody ask the other day, and I kind of want to answer it here, and I'll answer them. I am going to answer them privately. I kind of needed to think about it. They said they want to know, how do I feel about big companies coming in and greenwashing carbon credits? It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And just the same way we've seen in the last 5 years, a lot of big ag companies try to tag into the word regenerative and say, oh, we've got this regenerative product. Oh, we've got this. This is regenerative. And when you really drill down into it, it's not what we would call, or what I would call, regenerative. It's just another extractive method. They're trying to co-opt it. And if we want to talk about what it means to be, truly regenerative, you're not going to be using anything that ends in side, like insecticide or herbicide or pesticide, right? And that's what they want to sell you. They want to sell you something else. They want to sell you a solution in a box or in a bottle, and it's not there. Being regenerative and a regenerative manager is, you're not trying to force nature, you're trying to coexist with nature. Gentle nudges, gently guide nature on where she's going anyway, and just make sure she doesn't stray from that path. And over time, yeah, I've got some problem areas. There's shit I don't like looking at. I don't go over there anymore. Don't like looking at that erosion. I'm not going to spend the money to fix it. Anything I do is going to make it worse. I'm just going to quit looking at it. It's not a problem. I also don't really feel like I need to maximize my return on every acre. I'm okay with letting, We can have some brush down there in the bottom. Quail need a place to live too. That's fine. Deer, we'll leave that little plum thicket over there because deer like to use it. That's fine. I don't, hair stuck in my mouth. Anyway, I'm just I'm rambling on now, I suppose. But regenerative management, it doesn't come from top down. Regenerative management is innovative. It requires a manager on the ground to be innovative, to try new things, to think new things. Big companies do not innovate. Big companies are incapable of innovation. All a big company can do is increase its efficiency. Big companies buy their innovation. They don't innovate themselves. They buy their innovation. And in this case, what I think kind of helps us stay a little bit safe from the eventual takeover and greenwashing of the regenerative movement and of the term and carbon credits is transparency and truthfulness. Because they can't really claim to be regenerative unless they can prove they are. And we can prove we are. I can show improvements over the land on a long time scale. And it only works on a long time scale. And that's another thing that big companies can't tolerate is they can't tolerate long-term returns. They want the short-term returns. They've got to show the shareholders something every quarter, right? They can't have a project that loses money for 3 years. Investors won't tolerate that because it's a company, a for-profit company has a legal duty to the shareholders to return profit. I mean, that was established in a court case, Dodge versus Ford, over 100 years ago. The sole purpose of a for-profit corporation is to generate profit for the shareholders, period. The end. And regenerative agriculture, regenerative practices, not all about profit. And sometimes there's a significant amount of loss or investment that has to be made in order to see the benefits down the line. That's not in line with the values and ethics of how large companies operate. So just like we've talked about, like with United or these airlines trying to make their claims, like we're going to be net zero in 2030, or we're going to have a zero emissions fleet in 2030. Fine, great. Show me the money. Show me the proof. You can't deliver a deliverable. All you can do is try to get publicity for a statement, and that's what they're doing.
Virtue signaling.
Yeah, that's probably a better term than anything I said.
Yeah, they're trying to let their audience know that they're good guys, that they're trying to do the right thing. If the right thing, what people believe to be the right thing is reducing man-made climate change, then they want to let people know that, hey, we're on your side. Buy from us.
I'm all for reducing man-made impacts on the climate. It doesn't stop climate change. I mean, the climate is going to change whether or not we're here or not. The things we've done in the last 100 years are going to change the climate whether we're here for the next 100 or not. The things that happened in 1491, 1492, 1493 changed the damn climate. Okay. So if we want to talk about human caused climate change, let's go back 500 years and let's kill 100 million people through the Americas. And let's not have their effect on their ecosystem management. Let's get rid of that. Cause a little ice age in Europe. Okay. Everything we've done, everything we've ever done on this planet has had an effect on the climate. The climate is changing and it's going to continue to change whether we're here or not. The climate changed before there were people walking on Earth. I mean, 65 million years ago, when the Chicxulub meteor wiped out the dinosaurs, like you think the daily high was, average of 85 degrees? No, fuck no. It was way different then. So climate change is inevitable. It happens, right? It happens. It's happening. It's been happening. It's going to continue to happen. We cannot stop the climate from changing. So what's the narrative really about? I mean, is it about control to some degree? Yes. Do we need to reduce our carbon emissions? Probably wouldn't be a bad idea. Do we need to quit dumping chemicals into the water that never go away? That'd probably be a good idea. Do we need to quit spraying crap on crops that never go away in the ecosystem? That'd probably be a good idea too. But at the same time, we have to live on this earth, and there's what 8.5 billion people that got to eat. So it's a very complex conversation that's very simple to have until you actually have some decision making power, and then it becomes much more complex, right?
Yeah, it makes me wonder, what is the motivation? What is the underlying? I mean, I tend to believe it's all money. Money is control, money is power. But then if you want to go deeper here, Brian, in the last 15 minutes, there is a quote. I could look it up. Someone else can fact check me on this, but it said everything in this life, everything in this world is about sex, except for sex. Sex is about power.
Okay.
It's some guy with one name. So you know when you have one name, you're kind of a big figure. I'd have to look that one up real quick. And it just makes me wonder, with Davos, the World Economic Forum, we know what's best for you. By 2030, you'll have nothing and you'll be happy. We're going to decide your diet. We're going to decide when and where you can recreate, and how you can recreate, and how many kids you should have. And it just makes me wonder, like, is that really about sex? I don't get it. Like, I just don't get it. If you have that much money, you have all the security in the world. Why? What is the motivation? What is the underlying driving reason? Is it just human nature? Is Genghis Khan that we just have to uh, expand our empire? That we are always going to be creating a dynasty? And
There's
is
probably something deep seated in all of us that we, on some level, I think we all want to leave something behind. We all want to be known for something. We all want to leave a legacy. We want to be remembered when we're no longer walking the earth. And there's probably just a dozen, well, more than a dozen. There's a bunch of different ways to skin that cat. And maybe one of them is having 147 children. I'm not that guy.
Genghis Khan had thousands.
Yeah, I remember reading something that like 1 in 50 people can trace their lineage back to Genghis Khan, or maybe it's like 1 in 6 in China or something. Like just a crazy amount of people that can trace back to Genghis Khan. Yeah.
And I don't know if back then there was utility to that. Maybe there was security, that warring tribes, you guaranteed that your bloodline and your legacy were never going to be dominated by somebody else. Today, I don't know what the utility behind this incredible power and control is. I I mean, if you just diversify your portfolio when you're that rich and live off the interest, the dividends, you're going to be fine. You're going to have a bunch of low risk investments, and your heirs, your offspring, there's no reason to create, in my opinion, there's no reason to create a legacy where you have a bloodline that the sun never sets on. I don't get why the reason. Maybe it is just that fear of death.
You don't have as large of an ego as Mr. Genghis Khan, apparently.
Or Klaus
That's what it
Schwab.
is. Ego.
Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates.
I think it's ego. I think a lot of it would be ego driven.
Yeah, ego, and the ego is very afraid of death. It's afraid of our own mortality. That no matter what I create, what I accomplish, how rich I get, I am gonna die. And so, what can I do so that my actions outlive my matter?
And I think that's taken different forms for different generations. There was I'm just thinking there was seemed like there was a generation in this area that was, I'm going to say, came to power, but kind of, started running things in this area in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And they were very particular on how they wanted things. And some of the trust and estates that my family has dealt with were written in the 50s. And it was 2017 when we finally put the last nail in the last coffin of my great great grandfather's trusts from the 50s,
Wow.
because he wanted to exert control
From the grave.
from the grave 2 generations down the line. That's supremely arrogant. And I have no desire to saddle my descendants with any of my stupid decision making for 2 generations. They can have the license to screw it up on their own or succeed, but I'm not going to try to control things after I'm dead. It would be nice to be remembered, but you know, the amount of people that get remembered for more than 5 years by somebody other than their family is vanishingly small. I mean, you got to put your name on a building to be remembered. And if you really want to be remembered for a long time, go build a library at a university. Like, put your name on a library at a university. That might get you another 100 years past your expiration date that people care about you. But when they rebuild that building in 100 years, it's gone. Your legacy probably won't be remembered anymore. History moves on, the world moves on. And to think that I'm going to do something in my life that's going to have an effect while I'm not walking the earth is pretty arrogant of me. And I don't think I need to have that sort of control later after I'm dead.
No, I'm actually I enjoy what I do, love what I do. And right now I'm in the parenting father leadership role, and I'm going to treat that with the utmost respect and do it the best I can to be the leader of a child who's going to have her own life someday. And I got one more on the way in October, but I certainly see and look forward to the day where I sit in the back seat and just enjoy the ride. That I'm my children's biggest cheerleader, and I am there supporting them with a smile on my face and clapping and affirming them and just saying, "You go, you get it, you go do it. This is awesome. I'm watching. I done what I done, and it's your turn."
Help them build a better future. I like it. All right. Lightning round. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Like, I really wanted to ask you this 2 hours ago. You carry every day?
I don't, Brian.
When you do, what do you carry?
I have a Shadow Systems 9mm. It's a Glock 17 styled.
So that's a DR 920.
Yes.
I carry a Shadow MR 920, which is the
Okay.
Glock 19 size, so a little bit smaller. I thought about getting an XR just so I get the full size frame with a short slide, because I've got big paws and they don't really fit on that stubby little 19 grip.
And that's why I don't carry, as mine's a little bigger than I should have bought. Uh yeah, I do just as a symbol. I do support and think we should be open carrying, concealed carrying. I need to get something other than a Glock 17 style.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot of good out there. It's hard to go wrong with Shadow Systems. I think they're great little pistols, especially for the price.
Yes.
All right, you want to talk about Ranch Investor?
Is this my final going out plug?
Oh, you can have as long as you want, man. I've got a couple hours yet.
Well, I'm hoping that some of your audience can give me feedback on this pooled investment, a syndication of 80 limited partners at $50,000 each for a $4 million ranch. I don't believe your audience is the investor. I think your audience is more of a person who would be the lessee, the neighbor type. So I want to hear their perspective as well. Is it palatable? What if someone came up to them and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to syndicate this neighboring ranch, and we would like you to be the lessee. How do you envision a relationship working out for the next 10 years, given the terms of the special purpose vehicle is a 10-year term? How do you envision this lease going? Do you want to share risk? Because with a pooled investment, I definitely would like to share risk. More risk means more return for the LPs. So that, to me, that would be like an AUM rate based on you could peg it to CattleFax or the Chicago Board of Trade or CME, I guess. But if you're grazing cattle and the price of calves goes up, then the price of the lease goes up. If calves crash, the lease rate crashes. If it's a drought year and you have to destock 40%, would that be better than flat rate $25 in AUM here in Montana, where the lessee takes all the risk and just praise God for a huge upside, big calf prices and a big amount of rain? I'm curious about that. What people, your audience, Brian, probably your guys do have a lot of leases. I'm guessing they're flat rate, $30 in AUM. I want to hear about a dynamic flex lease.
Okay. Like, real good thoughts. I never thought about what it might look like to fluctuate the AUM rate based on calf price. That's interesting. Varying the fee or rate based on drought. I'd really have to think about that a little more. With anything, with any agreement between two people or two or more people, right? Whatever you put on paper is just your best understanding of what you guys are talking about. And when it's made with, from one individual party to another individual party, there's usually not a lot of misunderstanding, or not a lot of places to misunderstanding, because party A and party B, they can get face to face and they say, this is what we're really talking about. This is what we both intend. Let's write this down so we have it legal. The more people that get involved, I would think it would be more difficult to get consensus or get agreement on specific issues. Yeah.
Well, so I am the GP, the general partner. I have to put in 2% of what I call hurt money, meaning I don't get to see anything back from that until my LPs have obtained their promised IRR of 5%, internal rate of return over 10 years. Then I get my principal back, plus some revenue share, some profit share. So there's an alignment of interest with me and the investors. I'm thinking holistically. I'm trying to think of what the alignment of interest would be with the lessee, because normally that's an antagonistic relationship. Me as the landowner, I want all I can get with very little risk, and I want you, Brian, you're the lessee tenant. I want you to bear all the risk and pay a market premium. That doesn't seem to make a good relationship over 10 years. That's not thinking holistically. So I'm wondering how you have an alignment of interest between landowner and lessee. Based on drought.
Carrot, right?
Say that again.
It's either a stick or a carrot.
Yes. Yeah, and so the drought provision, it would be more like the ranch historically carries let's just say 1,000 AUMs. That's what we're planning for. So if you can't stock it to 1,000, then me as the landowner, I'm going to get hurt because I was anticipating 1,000 AUMs of income. But if you need to, if you can only run less because it's a drought year, then there'll be that provision. But I'm also wondering, how do we incentivize the lessee to do more aggressive rotations? How do you say, well, I'd really like to see you out here in this part of Montana, putting 200 head on 80 acres for 4 days. That's what I want to see happen. How do we make that happen together?
Right. Well, that would have to be like rotating, that would have to be kind of spelled out in the original agreement, when you're looking for somebody to lease the land. And gosh, it seems like every time I see one, you hear about 2 or 3 successful ones and you hear about a couple of them that don't work because they weren't specific enough, or they didn't think about this scenario, or the guy just plain lies and says, yeah, I was planning on moving him. I was planning on moving him tomorrow. Yeah, I'm going to go out there and move him, and never does. Seen all those things happen. But obviously having buy-in on the front is tremendously important to make sure that those are going to get done. And this is a case of like mutual self-interest. Okay. Like that's one of the ways I define trust, is mutual self-interest. If you and I share mutual self-interest, if we're both going after the same thing, I can pretty much trust what you're going to do, and you pretty much trust what I'm going to do, right? So
Oh yeah.
That's one way we can approach what trust is, especially in a scenario like this. Let's share the goals. Let's make sure we're both pulling in the same direction. So I'm trusting that your actions are aligned with this goal, and you're trusting that my actions are aligned with this goal. But you've gone back to like drought, like in stocking rate, drought. You've been talking about it a little bit. So it seems like 6 out of 10 years, my rain records indicate I'm in a drought for the growing season. The records from the Noble Research Institute down in Ardmore, they're in drought 7 of 10 years during the growing season. Stillwater, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State University Research Center, they're in drought 5 of 10 years. So when we say 1,000 cow outfit, is that your quote normal stocking rate, or is that your actual drought stocking rate, which you should be at because we're in drought in the Great Plains at least 50% of the time? I would strongly encourage everybody up and down the Great Plains, drag out 30 years of rain records and fight me. I almost guarantee you half the time you're in drought during the growing season. I've just kind of learned a couple of those facts that, there was kind of Great Plains wide. I'd been looking at Dad's drought records, and 5-6 years ago, it's kind of like, it seems like I'm always in drought. Like, it's drying up. We're in a drought, have a couple of good years. It dries up. We get in a drought. Then we have a couple of good years. That's the pattern. Like, how many good years do I get out of 7? Maybe 2, sometimes 3. So if I'm only getting 2 to 3 of 7 as a quote normal amount of rainfall, or above normal amount of rainfall when it matters during the growing season, I need to manage like I'm in drought. I need to manage like I'm getting less rain. I need to manage for the rain I actually fucking get during the growing season. So I pulled my stocking rate back about 80%. And I watched the land get better and better and better and better. So that's my 2 cents on stocking rate and drought. I think there's a lot of folks that have a stocking rate too high because rain, we just have an overly optimistic view of the rainfall. We don't see it. We're not thinking critically about when the rain is and what it's actually doing for our soil. I get 12. If I get 12 inches of rain in December, I don't care. 12 inches of rain in December doesn't grow grass. Does it screw up my yearly average? You betcha. When do I need rain? April, May, June, July. That'll grow a lot of grass. So
yeah, the whole averages it's a terrible, terrible thing to consider because as you mentioned, you can be drought for 5 years in a row. And then here in Montana, we'll say average precip annual of 13 inches, maybe 14. But if, like this year, we've had over 14 inches of precip just in the first, May, June, July of this year. So that was one that's going to make it's one observation in a time period that's going to be calculated into the annual average. But when it came, how it came, it means, the averages mean nothing. It's when it comes, how it comes. 3 inches an hour, like that's, now you're talking erosion shit.
Yep, 100%. 7 inches of rain in an hour is not the same as 2 inches of rain in a day. I would rather have 2 inches of rain that took 24 hours to arrive than 7 inches that comes in 2 hours. Like, one scenario, I got to go put in water gaps. The other one, I sit at home and I watch it rain and I just laugh. So, yeah. So you said you'd like to have some feedback from my listeners and subscribers.
Yes, sir.
And a great place to do that would be to come to my Discord server after this episode releases, which should be exactly a week from today. So now you know when it was recorded, everybody. But come to my Discord server and just ask. I bet by next Monday afternoon, evening, there'll be enough folks that have listened to it. You can have a great discussion.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm glad to hear you're on Discord. I will jump into that thread, and I look forward to hearing back from everyone. Thanks for the opportunity, Brian.
Yep. And for those of you that aren't on my Discord server, there's a link on my link tree. So it's pretty easy to go to. Just click the link tree link in the show notes and scroll down to Discord, and it's right there.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much. Anything I can do for you?
Well, for the people that aren't going to come on Discord and talk to you, where do you want them to reach out to you?
Oh, just Ranch Investor has all sorts of social media venues that I don't take care of because I hate social media. I saw, my wife was on it the other night, her social media, and I just got this just terrible feeling. It's so toxic and it's just so painful.
It's toxic and addictive. But so ranchinvestor.com, make sure that's in the show notes, and any other links you want me to throw up?
Ranchinvestor.com. We're on every social media platform out there, and everything gets sent to me. At the end of the week, I see what the communications are, and then I do respond to them personally. But just I don't post them directly. It's through my assistant. So I would love to hear everyone's feedback. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent, you hate it, you love it. Anything. We definitely want to hear from Brian's crowd, his friends.
Oh, sometimes they can get pretty opinionated.
Well, and I want to leave off on a good note of RCAF, because RCAF does get a bad name from the NCBA crowd. And my personal belief is that there are probably some issues that RCAF takes on that might be unpalatable to some. And maybe there are some issues that how they take them on could be unpalatable. But I was at a convention where it was discussed about sovereignty and freedom and liberty and why the United States is not likely to become compelled and have your farms just taken like South Africa, Zimbabwe, potentially the Netherlands. And it's because we have the Second Amendment. And you'll never hear that said at an NCBA convention. You won't hear people saying, keep being independent, keep being free, and God damn it, never, ever give up your Second Amendment right. Fight for that. It is related to being an independent cattleman and choosing what you want to produce and how you want to produce it. you get to protect that with something on your hip, and that's pretty special. That's pretty unique, and you will never hear that at an NCBA convention. And I go to the NCBA stuff because they also have good education. Sometimes they're kind of shills for the big corporations, and absolutely they are absolutely wolf in sheep's clothing with Cargill JBS's money that they're using the checkoff dollar against you guys. You guys are paying for messaging to harm yourselves and to benefit lobbyists at NCBA and Cargill. So I want to leave on a positive note that RCAF is aging, and they definitely need some young guys who value freedom.
Yes, they do. And I'm an RCAF member. I didn't make it to Deadwood this year. I wanted to go. But way back in the middle of May, I was invited to speak at the Pratt County Farm Bureau meeting, which was the first night of the RCAF convention. So they asked first. So that's where I was last week. Would have loved to have been at RCAF, maybe next year. The thing that interests me about RCAF is, okay, their membership isn't as many as NCBA's. But NCBA has a lot of members that don't know they're members. Everybody that's a member of RCAF writes that check willingly. Like, there's a lot of NCBA members that are members because they fed at an NCBA affiliated yard, or they sold cattle at a sale barn that's an NCBA affiliated sale barn, and they automatically got signed up for an NCBA membership. I know 3 guys that found out in the last year that they've been NCBA members for a long time. So that happens. RCAF, I'm more than happy to send them my membership dues every year. You're right. Some of their approaches leave a bad taste in my mouth. I don't always like everybody they partner with and everything they say. But, between NCBA, U.S. Cattlemen's, and RCAF, there's a reason why RCAF gets my membership dollars, because I think they're the ones they're the ones fighting the hardest for people like me and my interests.
That's a good way to put it, Brian. And I feel the same way. To me, they feel like the 13 in 300. They've got insurmountable opposition, and the guys at the Alamo, I think that was another. Someone can fact check me. That was another like 13 on 1,000 of Santa Anna's army, which we know the outcome, and that's what's scary. We know the outcome of 300.
They fought a good fight, but they still lost.
Yeah. Well, and that's my fear of RCAF, and what they're standing for is the independent cattleman, the cow-calf producer, who is a bastion of freedom and liberty and sovereignty. That is under threat by some forces that are hard to reconcile.
I, for one, will not go quietly into the night. I will be one of the ones fighting. Like, I won't go silently.
What I know of you, Brian, I trust that is factual.
Thanks for that.
Well, thanks for letting me come on, Brian. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thanks for being here today, Colter. I had a hell of a lot of fun over the last, almost 2.5 hours. Pretty good one.
Yes. Yeah. And let's stay in touch. I enjoy sending you some things that I think you'll be interested in. Yeah.
Don't stop doing that. I sure appreciate it.
All right. Well, have a good Monday.
You too. And gang, I don't know, go do something of the week, whatever. Bye.
See ya.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a review if you haven't already. And don't forget to check out the Q&A and the polls on Spotify. Your support helps us bring more enlightening conversations and fresh stories from the world of farming and ranching. Thank you for listening to Ranching Reboot, your favorite regenerative ag podcast.